If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Winter is here. I'm down in the basement, freezing my butt off. I'm not even sure if Scott up there in the north can get out of his basement with all the snow they've been getting. But we're here to talk summer. We're here to talk baseball with you guys. I'm Craig Toth. This is Scott Jackson. This is Bucs in the freezing basement tonight. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm a little chilly. I'm a little cold. I'm digging my way out of the snow. It's not as bad as it is up in Erie, but lake effect is hitting us hard, so I'm ready to warm up and talk Pirates baseball.
Yeah, and it would be nice if we were talking some Pirates hot stove. Before we jumped on here, we talked about the fact that Major League Baseball itself is kind of heating up a little bit, causing Pirates fans to get fairly heated themselves. A big signing for the Athletic Baseball team. I wish they would call themselves the Athletic Baseball Club, but ABC just might sound a little bit too cheesy or something. So the Athletic Baseball team, people are calling them the Sacramento A's, but they are the Athletic Baseball team, signing Luis Severino to a very large contract, 3 years, over $60 million, and Pirates fans and media and the like taking to social media to talk about the fact that the Pirates have never done this. They've never gone this high, the highest they've ever gone. And it wasn't even really, it was technically a free agent signing, but, Frankie had been with us. We signed him to a 3-year deal, which ends up not working out for the Pirates for $39 million. The one thing I will point out, though, is that we are not among the clubs that have not signed a $100 million contract yet. There's only one team left with that, and that is the White Sox. They've never signed a player to a $100 million deal yet. So we're not in that, but we are kind of dealing with the fact that, people are saying, well, if the A's are moving to Sacramento, they're not even going to be playing in a real major league, stadium, and they can do this. Why can't we? The only reason is because of Bob Nutting. No. The reason is because the Athletics had a payroll of around $31 million. So $40 million less than what the Pirates are, currently estimated to be sitting at right now. They had to go out and spend money. Yes, this could benefit them in the long run. They signed him to 3 years. They're working their way towards a new stadium. But realistically, they needed to put this money towards stuff and could overpay for a player like Severino. Severino's a good player. But as we've seen the contracts this offseason, they've been all overpays in my estimation. But they were able to overpay by more because they have so much of a gap to kind of keep them from getting another grievance filed by the MLB PA. But then also because they just talked Major League Baseball into letting them move, they're not going to sit there and have a $40 million payroll. It's just not going to be a good look. They're going to have grievances. I don't even know if the stadium has broken ground yet. So they want to be in the good graces of everybody. They're going to go out. They're going to give some big contracts. I've seen it out there that they want to spend upwards of $100 million a year that means they have like $49 million left to spend this year. But a lot of these to me are going to be overpays. And yes, it could end up working out for them in the end if, Severino has 3 good years. Everybody else who was performing well, like a Rooker, a Blade, they all continue to grow. But honestly, like, yeah, to me, this isn't where I go, cheap Bob. Why can't you do this? Yeah, I wish he would do something like this, but it's not frustrating to me because we understand what was behind this signing.
Yeah, I'm not losing any sleep over not getting Severino, not spending that kind of money on him. But like we were talking before, the nature of this point, we're not even to the winter meetings quite yet, and so to take a player off the board for a player in this dynamic, it seems like the players and the agents have had a lot of the power, a lot of the leverage. For them to come off the board this early, you have to overpay. And a few other things. One, yeah, you mentioned no grievance, try not to get any more grievances. They're moving even temporarily, into a new market, and they'll be playing in Sacramento for a little bit. You got to get people to show up to watch your team play. You got to develop some kind of fan base that's going to show up. You can't just expect to sell tickets based on the stars of the other teams for every, like the Pirates have done a few seasons where, oh, hey, Aaron Judge is coming. Why don't you come buy your tickets? Doesn't matter who we have on the team. They can't build, and when they get to Vegas, they want to be a competitive team. So these are the steps to do that. And yeah, I don't think it's the right move based on where the Pirates are. But yeah, if they're trying to spend money, and this is the same argument for why a salary cap could potentially benefit certain groups of players, is that if you are in this situation, because it's almost like they're in a situation where there's a floor, they are spending money to get to a certain number if the reports are correct. So you are paying more money to middle of the road players that maybe haven't necessarily earned that kind of money. And that's why, in a complete tangent, that the salary cap and salary floor system would benefit, veterans and middle of the road kind of players.
Yeah, because I mean, we even see like a Matthew Boyd, signing with the Cubs because the Cubs had a disappointing season. They steal a manager, away from a division rival, and they sign Cody Bellinger. They do all these other stuff, but they were even saying that they were, maybe looking to kind of move on from Bellinger's payroll, but that would allow some payroll flexibility, and they were looking to spend more. So you spend, $29 million for 2 years of a guy who hasn't pitched over 80 innings in like 5 years and pitched, not too many last year, was successful in those innings, but is still, working his way back from Tommy John surgery. So you're basically paying, $14.5 million for a guy next year who probably tops out at 100 innings, which in today's game, the way that things are going, I mean, the Dodgers paid more than that for Blake Snell. And that's pretty much, where Blake Snell lines in with, whether it would be an injury or just, shortened outings and different stuff. But still, I mean, and Frankie Montas, 2 years, was it $34 million, $17 million a year for a guy who had a 4.5 ERA. I mean, it's basically saying I'll pay $17 million a year for Bailey Falter. And that's no disrespect to Bailey, who had a great year, but $17 million for pretty much a guy that would line up to be a fifth starter in a good rotation is just not how I would want to see, the Pirates spend their funds. And this is obviously goes, we're talking about a lot of pitching here. It would go, kind of the same for, the bats with me. I mean, we could say, the Pirates could go out and overpay. A lot of people are talking about, Scott, they're talking about Tyler O'Neill and, what it may take to get him. I mean, I've seen anywhere from 3 years, 40 million to 3 years pushing up towards, almost 60 million if you're going to go on that overpay market.
Yeah.
But you're also taking a huge risk with his injuries and stuff on top of that. Pirates fans, at least for, the short term, would be extremely excited. Largest contract, and you push that kind of stuff through. But I feel like it would be the same thing as when you signed Brian Hayes to an extension. who's next? When you sign Brian Reynolds to the largest extension, the largest contract extension in, Pirates history, and you say, okay, well, who's next? You do it to Mitch Keller, and then once again, it's like, who's next? Obviously, I'd like to see some more get those extensions, but I think that it would be short-lived. And in the end, the number of these contracts that work out in kind of these overpays. Before the show, we were talking about a Yasmani Grandal. I know that, for Pirates fans, there's some angst about the beginning of a season, some joy over the second half of the season. But I can remember when he signed back with the White Sox when they were completing the end of their rebuild. They went out early. They targeted him. They overpaid. It worked out well for the first 2 seasons he was with them. For the second 2 seasons, they couldn't wait to get rid of him because of, the contract that he had signed. So, I mean, with this type of stuff and these overpays, there definitely is a risk. You have to be really smart about these types of signings. We saw it work out for the Royals last year with Lugo and Waka. I talked with David Sampson before, and, the talk around Major League Baseball after those 2 signings was like, man, they kind of threw in and overpaid for those guys. I don't know if this is really going to work out for them. And it turned out that it did, but there's just as much of a chance that we've seen, we talked about the Tigers before, throughout their rebuild have been going out and spending money and throwing larger contracts at people. But in the end, the people that got them to the playoffs were the ones that were making the minimum salaries, not those guys.
Maybe the Pirates Twitter and Pirates social media is so amped up about this idea of having a big free agent contract because we haven't had that, and we haven't had it blow up in our face before. We haven't had those really bad free agent contracts that hamstring the franchise for 3 years, 4 years, and really limit that financial flexibility that we talk so much about in Pittsburgh. Whether or not there is a stash of money that has accumulated over years to finally be spent. But yeah, if we were to go and get a free agent, if we were going to go sign a Tyler O'Neill to a 4-year contract or something like that, and he gets hurt like he tends to, there's a lot of upside there. But there is that opportunity where you could spend a huge chunk of money, more money than you've ever spent on a player or close to it, and he doesn't play that year. Now, how does that go for the Pirates? And the pitchforks come out for Ben Cherington at that point. So, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, because I mean, we've seen it on the smaller scale with just like a Michael A. Taylor last year, people that were clamoring for him to be signed, and then when they finally signed him, not celebrating, but excited about the potential of what he could bring, and obviously it didn't work. And, in that same breath, those same people a couple months later are the ones that are saying, well, man, they should probably just DFA him, like, cut bait. This was a terrible signing. So, I mean, even just on the smaller scale of the way that these kind of free agent signings go, there are only a certain few guys that are considered quote unquote, slam dunks in the free agent market. And even with that, there's things that can go wrong. We've seen, Mike Trout's career, completely go to shambles over the past few years because of injuries, Ronald Acuna, Albert Pujols with the Angels for like the second half of his deal with the long stuff. Rendon. I mean, so there are, a lot of those deals out there that kind of, like you said, hamstring franchises. Some teams, can obviously come back from that a little bit easier, AKA the Dodgers, the deferment Dodgers, as they will become to be known, over this time. And for me, I mean, it's not even so much the deferments that I get frustrated with. It's just the fact that they're playing with monopoly money. Like pretty much like at this point in time, like we are playing with real money that had to have been earned. And yes, some of it is given to us in revenue and whatever it may be, but they literally can print money.
Yeah,
That's
with
the
that big
part.
TV deal, right? And so maybe they see the writing on the wall because Major League Baseball wants to consolidate a lot of the media rights and the media money, and then more equally distribute that to make a more level playing field. They have to strike while the iron is hot. While they have this big advantage over all the other teams. Maybe that's why we're seeing them sign all these players up and have to push up this huge payroll because they may only be able to do it for a few more years.
Yeah, and pretty much in their ownership is a hedge fund that can pretty
Hmm.
much show them that they have the money, put it back into their investments, roll it over, and then just basically pay them on the interest of those investments, later on. So there's like that's twofold. So it's just
Or
like
the,
all that ridiculous money that they're able to have. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, if they can do it, do it. It just makes the offseason a lot less fun for other teams. I think that we don't get as frustrated as probably Blue Jays fans do after losing out on Otani. Obviously, a team that is mentioned with Soto again. I know that they're meeting with Burns. Just to know that there's other teams that can just come, like the Mets and just or the Yankees who have, another one of those large TV deals and can just take that person out from underneath them. And
Mhm.
especially in the way that it's been done with these deferrals and just overpays and outrageous contracts and stuff. But I don't know. It's definitely it's a weird landscape in baseball, but it's one that we've kind of been seeing, for plenty of years. And like I said, with Pirates fans, right now we're just looking for, something to get upset about to a degree, just because, nothing's really happening. We see, Aroldis Chapman get signed by the Red Sox. And I thought it was kind of a foregone conclusion that he was going to be gone unless he would come back on some sort of discount. If he would have came back for, you know, $7 million, $8 million or something like that, then it would be possibly something, that could kind of get done. And I know that we're just talking about a couple $1 million there, but here's the thing is if the Pirates have a hard line and another team is just basically like, okay, we're looking to spend and Aroldis, yeah, we'll just keep on. It'll be like Pirates say like $10 million and the Red Sox are just like 10 million and one. And the Pirates go up and the Red Sox just kind of outbid them. I mean, it's not something the Pirates haven't experienced before. I always look back to J.A. Happ. Huntington tried to sign him, but basically the last time that he was offered something by the Blue Jays, he didn't even come back and talk to Huntington because he knew the Pirates weren't going to match it just because the Blue Jays were just going to keep on going higher and higher, and it just became more of a frustration. But for Pirates fans, they're also kind of, I think I use the wording to you as they wax poetic about players after they leave. And yes, we've seen a decent amount of players as Pirates fans go on to have this great success once they leave the Pirates. But even like players that perform well for the Pirates, they maybe overestimate or romanticize how large of like a contribution they made to the Pirates. That's just my opinion. It's the thing that happens when we've talked about Brian Reynolds, and I always say Brian Reynolds is a great baseball player, really good baseball player. But people act like Brian Reynolds. They'll throw around like the All Star thing. Great, he earned it. He's a great player and everything like that. He was like a 3 WAR player or less last year. To me, the guys like the Bobby Wood Juniors who were like the nines, the tens, like
Mhm.
we put Reynolds because he's been so consistent on the Pirates and he's been like the Pirates' best hitter for like the past 3 years that it's almost like it's like, okay, well, he's the best hitter on our team. So he must be good in all of Major League Baseball. For
Yeah.
Aroldis Chapman, for me, Scott, I had to look at the numbers and I told you that I did this beforehand is that he was tied for in the Pirates bullpen, which was fourth worst bullpen overall in the league for the season. He was tied for first in WAR with Dennis Santana at 1.1. First on the Pirates, 39th in Major League Baseball. His ERA was 6th in the bullpen at 3.79. 98th in Major League Baseball. His FIP, second, 304, 42nd in Major League Baseball. His WHIP was 6th on the Pirates at 135, 122nd of qualified relievers in Major League Baseball. There was not a category where he was in the top 30 unless you went to like some obscure category, probably like strikeouts per inning or something. But like to me, like it was just like, yes, he creates a hole on this team, and we do need those left-handed relievers and stuff. But I think that it's almost like overestimating or just overcompensating for the loss by like talking about how good he was. He was good.
Yeah.
David, I told you this beforehand. People want simple facts. David Bednar, who we went nuts on last season, had 7 blown saves. Aroldis Chapman had 5.
Yeah. Well, it's like $10.5 million didn't justify the production, and now he's making more money in Boston to another year older, making more money in the big fish, small pond. I'm sure it's just the fact of he's a Hall of Fame caliber player, and he has World Series championships. He was dominant for so many years with the Reds and the Cubs and the Yankees. He's a big name, and we've been starved for those big names. What was the last player that has made the Hall of Fame that wore a Pirates jersey? It's been a long time. And so I think that a lot of the fans on social media, the more vocal fans that are out there saying a lot of this stuff, they were excited to see a big name get signed for the Pirates, even if it wasn't justified in the end with how much he got paid. And so, yeah, you did have a lot of people that were frustrated that he went and signed somewhere else. I never made any kind of assumption that he would even be offered a deal with Pittsburgh, or at least not a competitive offer. So it didn't even dawn on me that he would be a Pirate next year. Okay, we had a good year. We missed the boat by not trading him when we had the opportunity because we had deluded ourselves into this thought that we were a competitive team. And it's something that we talk about with the Steelers a lot, right? Where Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season in his whole time, but you have a good chunk of people on social media that will complain about going to the playoffs and then losing in the first round. In football, either you are really good and you're a contender for the Super Bowl, or you're really bad and you get a great draft pick. Being in the middle is one of the worst things that you can do. And it's the same way with the Pirates when you're leading up into the trade deadline. Being in that middle where you're just outside the playoff picture, but you think you have a shot, or you go with the Chris Archer trade. We went on a long winning streak right before they traded for Archer. You can easily fool yourself into thinking that you're a better team or you have more of a shot than you do, and you hold on to these players too long. We saw the Brewers that trading Josh Hader when they were in the playoff picture. They traded their closer, a dominant closer, but it was time to move on. You have to look forward to these things, and not moving Chapman at the trade deadline and just losing him for nothing, was a big mistake, but it would have been a bigger mistake to spend more money to re-sign him.
Yeah, and for Pirates fans, I mean, you only have to look back 1 year, because I feel like as Pirates fans, we kind of do get stuck in this little bubble in Pittsburgh. And it's not a bad thing, because I love being in this bubble. I love being a Pirates fan. I love talking to other Pirates fans. I love having this podcast, talking with Scott every week, talking, to you guys, with you guys about all this kind of stuff. But we had, David Bednar the year before, who was not only the Pirates' best, reliever, but he also was one of the league's best relievers. And I went through his stuff. He had 2.3 F4. That was third in the league. His ERA was 2.00. That's 11th. His FIP was 2.53. That was 6th. His WHIP was 1.10. That was the worst he was in any category, and he was sitting at 35th. So overall, like when you looked at it, he fit in against other relievers as a top 10 reliever in the league, where Aroldis would be sitting somewhere between 35 and 50 when you kind of ranked all of those numbers out. And to me, it was just like, yeah, we did lose a piece. And yes, I will be frustrated if there isn't a replacement for that, a competent replacement for that. But to me, like it was an overpay when they brought him in. It became an overpay through the season, even though there were some bright spots. And like you said, I've been like the most adamant proponent that he should have been traded. You should have gotten something for him. You made that investment, and now you spent $10.5 million and you got nothing back for it. To me, that is, kind of one of the biggest misses. And you did mention something in there, Scott, that caught my ear, and that was something that we've been wanting to talk about. And that is, you mentioned Hall of Famer. And there are going to be some Hall of Famers, at least one. The last few years, the Veterans Committee, it's been usually about one guy, coming out of this every single time. And there's a pirate in there, man. And so people have gotten, kind of very passionate about this. And so we've been putting this off for a couple weeks, but we're going to talk about Dave Parker, the Cobra, and his, I guess, qualifications or whatever it may be, his stats, the stories about Dave Parker, our feelings about Dave Parker, and the chances of him being in the Hall of Fame. Because, like you said before, there hasn't been a Pirate or a person that's worn a Pirates uniform. We've got a manager that wore a Pirates hat,
Yeah.
recently in the Hall of Fame. But I mean, I think that's what people are really pushing for here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's got a pretty good shot. Uh, he's up for on the veterans ballot. He's always been one of those borderline guys that he was a Cincinnati Red when I was born, so I didn't get to see him play as a Pirate. But you hear great things. He started off as the heir apparent for Roberto Clemente. After Clemente died, he had that he had a really really high peak to his career. It was a bit short, and I guess a lot of it comes down to how do you look at the Hall of Fame? Do you compare players and look at their qualifications against the guys that are in the Hall of Fame already? Or do you look and see how they contributed to the game when they were a player? And I think that it's arguable that when he was at his peak, Dave Parker was one of the very best players in all of baseball. I mean, he won the MVP in 1978. He's a two-time World Series champion. Multiple time All Star. I think it was seven-time All Star, three-time Gold Glove, three-time Silver Slugger, two-time batting champion. He had a long career, and maybe that works against him. He had his problems with cocaine and things like that in the '80s. Um, but I think that if you were to because the game changes so much over time, it's tough to compare a guy that's played maybe in the last 10 years to somebody who played in the early part of the 20th century. So I think that it's only fair to compare a player based on their contemporaries. And I think that, when he was really performing and especially a good chunk of his time with the Pirates, he was at the very top of the league. And he had a bit of a resurgence. But one thing that has kind of worked against him, and I know that it's a stat that you talk about WAR a lot. If you look at his career, WAR and B WAR and specifically is very unkind to Dave Parker. There was I did some research and dug in a little bit, and there's a actually pretty cool website, Cooperstown Cred, where they take a lot of these articles and dive in deep to these players. And in 1986, he played all 162 games with the Reds, hit 31 home runs, and drove in 116. and he ended up with a .3 B WAR. So, how that calculates, I'm not exactly a mathematician or an expert, but you would think that if you're going to finish fifth in MVP voting, you're a little bit better than a .3 WAR player. So I think that some of these analytics, when you dive in deep to them, it doesn't paint the big picture, because especially when you break those down, in so and this is another source that I use. Walk Off Studios on YouTube did a great video where he broke down all of advanced metrics for Dave Parker, and from 1973 to 1991, his entire career for qualified players, third in hits, third in RBIs, third in total bases, fourth in extra base hits, eighth in runs, eighth in times on base, but 51st in WAR. Yeah, and we know what kind of cannon he had for an arm, but I think that kind of knocked him down a little bit. So it's kind of hard, as someone who isn't a completely bought in, I guess you could say, on some of the more advanced metrics, for me to look at some of these things. A very productive offensive player, but then it kind of gets skewed a little bit when it comes down to the WAR. He had very high highs, but he had low lows. Um, I think that he's going to make it just based on who's voting. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on where Dave Parker falls for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, for me, like it's more towards like the end of his career, because a lot of the times like players stick around almost to become those, like to compile those stats, because there's like certain like marks that people have made. I mean, right now he's over the 300 home run mark. He falls short on the 3,000 hits. There's overall, I mean, the OPS, I look at that and I look at 810 OPS, which is a 121 OPS plus for that period of time. So for me, like if Dave Parker ends his career and like rides off into the sunset after like that 85, 86 season with the Reds, and then doesn't stick a lot around and then like go to Oakland, Milwaukee, Toronto. Like I completely forgot that Dave Parker even spent a day in Toronto. I know it was only, 40 plate appearances, but it's something that, at 1991, like that was like the beginning and like the height, I would say, of my sports fandom, because at that point in time I was a fan of every single sport. I was a 12, 13-year-old boy. So I watched absolutely everything and didn't realize that. I honestly believe he gets in. I think he gets in because of what he did in his chunk of time with the Pirates. And I think that once you kind of get to this Veterans Committee, they look at this stuff maybe just a little bit different than, when they're on the ballots, for those first times. And it's almost like, yeah, he did spend, a lot of time with Cincinnati, some time with Oakland and the other teams that I mentioned, but the majority of his career was with the Pirates. And when he was with the Pirates and when he was with that team in the 70s, I mean, he was one of the best players, if not the best offensive player, him and Willie Stargell, head to head for that period of time. And they were amongst, and we're talking about, comparing people against the rest of the league. Like they were the cream of the crop within the entire league. But the one thing I will say is I have a hard time with this one for me, just because there's another guy on this list that has a special place in my heart, and that is the Wampum Walloper, and that is Dick Allen. I met him back in, I think it was like 19, no, it was 2000. I'm not trying to date myself too much. It would have been like 2000 and like maybe like 13 or 14. I was living around the Wampum area, and he would basically go for walks every day. And so people would just kind of run into him. And if we're talking about, just stats overall, I mean, this man from 1964, which was his first full season, until 1974. So for 10 full seasons, he was at the top of his game. Like he was absolutely insane. finished in the he was the rookie of the year, finished top 10 in MVP voting 3 times, won the MVP in 1972. Compiled, and I'm definitely a war guy. I hate to say to a degree, but in 15 years, 58.7 war. And that's after that was he had 3 absolutely horrible seasons, which kind of took that war down a little bit. He was honestly at that point in time, and from people that I've talked to, was the best and the most feared right-handed hitter in the league for that period of time in Major League Baseball. I mean, some of the numbers, like I said, everybody looks at that, doesn't have the hits, has the home runs, about 351. But for me, like, it's everybody's saying, like, everybody, it's a different time, it's a different ball game. But I think we've actually kind of really come to appreciate OPS a little bit more. The man for his career had a 912 OPS, a 156 OPS plus, 58.7 B WAR for his career. So I think when this announcement came out, I basically said the Wampum Walloper and the Cobra make it happen. I definitely believe that they are both Hall of Famers. I just don't want to see one get in without the other. It was kind of like this year with the Pirates Hall of Fame. I wanted Manny in so bad I could taste it, but you had Bonds and Leland as well. But I was just like, yeah, I'd be really, really happy about those ones. But man, I'd be really sad that Manny didn't make it in. For me, this kind of feels the same way. But yeah, I mean, and I think that part of it is for Dave Parker is a little bit of the Pirates fandom, but the numbers that you put out there, the peak that he had in his career, how good he was. I mean, I don't see how they can keep him out.
Yeah, especially with who's voting. Some guys that have played the game, and they're not just baseball writers that can sometimes have that high and mighty opinion of themselves, but these are people that in some cases played against Dave Parker or played with him. And have a vote there. I think that we talk a lot about baseball's Hall of Fame being the hardest one to get into and having it on another level from a lot of the other Hall of Fames. But I think that there's room for telling stories about the players. I mean, Bill Mazeroski, we love Bill Mazeroski, and one of the greatest defensive players to ever play. But apart from that big home run that he had, does he have the resume? There's room in the Hall of Fame to have players that have told this. You can tell the story of baseball through these players. Bill Mazeroski, just based on that one swing and the double plays that he turned, I feel like was justified in going to the Hall of Fame. So there's a spot in the Hall of Fame to think about Dave Parker swinging the sledgehammer in the on deck circle, the hockey mask, the the throws that he makes. And 2-time World Series champion, winning that second one with Oakland. I think that sometimes we get a little too fine with the Hall of Fame, and not to say that everybody deserves to be in there or anybody who's had a couple of good years, but the resume that he compiled just with the Pirates was a heck of a start to a Hall of Fame career. And maybe he did hold on a little too long, but really when it comes down to it, I think it's time to put it over him.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change.